Good morning and good afternoon to colleagues here in the room and around the world. As you heard, my name is Alexandra Yester, and it is a pleasure for me to be presenting the final social inclusion results report from the previous strategic plan. This is an area close to my heart, following my 25 years so far in UNICEF, where I've spent most of my time in the field working in India, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Moldova, and it's a great pleasure to be able to lead this wonderful team you see with us here today in New York. So while the goal of this report is, of course, to share our 2017 results in social inclusion, I have to admit to you that I also have an ulterior motive. I would like to make you even more enthusiastic about this innovative area for a few reasons. Our work on social policy and inclusion is more tangible than you might think. It contributes to results across the strategic plan. It's absolutely crucial for reaching children, for reaching the poorest and most vulnerable children. And finally, it's really great value for money. But let's move on now to the tangible. So this photo that you see here also graces the cover of the report. And I'd like to introduce to you Sarah, who lives in Mosul, Iraq. Sarah's family receives $40 a month cash transfer. And her mother has told us that she uses the money for food and points out getting enough to eat helps the children focus on their classes. Who can learn, after all, on an empty stomach? So UNICEF's social policy work in Iraq, yes, it helps address Sarah's family's poverty. It also contributes directly to Sarah's nutritional well-being and her ability to learn. So why is UNICEF involved in social policy? Sometimes it can seem so intangible in comparison to areas that we all know we're so good at, whether health, education, or child protection. But like this molecule that our friend in the slide is pointing to, social policy work is both not particularly visible and absolutely essential. Social policy work, yes, starts with evidence generation and advocacy, but it goes beyond that to actually generate results. By doing what? Measuring child poverty and helping governments include actions to address it in their national plans. That's how you help millions of Sarahs. Expanding social protection systems to reach and benefit more children, including in emergencies. Influencing government budgets, decisions, and processes so that government funds reach the right children at the right time for the right services. And finally, providing greater voice and visibility to children otherwise on the margins, whether through our work on human rights, participation, or local governance. So let's take a further look now at what this has looked like in practice in 2017. In the photo on the left, you can meet Maria and her granddaughter Estere. They're making some maize porridge, and they live in Malawi. Maria cares for her 3 grandchildren alone. The family receives a government cash transfer that UNICEF helps to support, and Maria uses that money to buy livestock, food, and school uniforms for her grandchildren. Sound familiar? Thousands of miles away in Iraq, the same results are being achieved. These funds are helping, and this program is helping to fight poverty and to increase the dignity of this family. It is also helping to improve nutrition and education. Let me talk a bit more about our social policy inputs in Malawi. We're also doing a lot of work in Malawi on public finance, and that work has helped to nearly triple the cash transfer budget, to triple it with the government's own money, adding nearly 8,000 households just in 2017 alone. We are helping the government to strengthen the shock sensitivity of the social policy system so that during the lean season in Malawi, the amount of the transfer can be increased for families who need it the most. And we're helping generate evidence on child poverty and advocate for increased funding for health, education, and social inclusion programs for the most vulnerable children. And here, too, we have seen a real impact. In Malawi, in part through UNICEF support, overall public expenditure increased by 15% in 2017, and specifically on key social sectors by 23%. Let's move now to meet Shireen Akhtar in Bangladesh in the photo on the right. Shireen is 17 years old, and she belongs to an adolescent club in Dhaka, near Dhaka rather, in Bangladesh. She directly received a grant of about US $180 from UNICEF to start a business selling snacks and other household items. Shireen is now earning 600 to 800 taka daily, about $10, which she uses to help her family. UNICEF's inputs in Bangladesh are helping address child poverty and strengthen the social protection system. Okay, so these are specific examples, and I bet you'd like to have an idea of what the impact is more globally. Over the past 4 years, 29 more countries have established routine child poverty measurements. So now I think that's over 1 year, bringing us up to a total of 58 countries who are regularly measuring child poverty. We have fallen slightly short of our target of 60 countries, but pretty close. In 69 countries, have registered a positive impact of their social protection programs on children's well-being. And here we far exceeded our target. We had hoped to make this happen in 53 countries. So here, by helping countries look at whether social protection is actually having an impact on child well-being, we hope to sharpen those programs. And those programs are nearly always government funded. Again, an example of how we manage to leverage government's own funds. As the Bangladesh story shows, this work is also contributing directly to adolescent empowerment and doing so in ways that can help reduce child marriage, which leads us to the next slide. Staying in Bangladesh here for a while, because Bangladesh, in fact, is getting serious about addressing child marriage. And this is happening in part because UNICEF and other partners have helped the government to see how damaging child marriage is, both socially and economically, to the country's future. So how are we helping the government to act on their concern? By taking a few steps. First, to determine what interventions the government is already supporting that have real potential to help reduce child marriage, and to help them determine how much they're investing in those interventions already. Then tracking that budget to see if it's actually being allocated and spent as planned, because that's a trick. It's not only what's in the budget, but is the budget being used as intended. And finally, tracking to see whether those interventions are working and to adjust those budgets to get better results. So UNICEF's public finance work in Bangladesh helps identify how funds are being spent in education, in health, and social protection, helps sharpen how those funds are being spent to add impact that has to do with gender and that helps in ending child marriage. So once again, you can see how far beyond the bounds of what you might think of as social policy and social inclusion this work goes. We're making a difference for governance, for sectoral results, for gender, and for social inclusion. Zooming out, the report, in fact, documents many similar achievements in other countries. By 2017, social spending on a per capita basis was being maintained or increased in 77 countries where UNICEF works. And now onto the next slide, from where you can see an activity going on in Borneo and an example of the kind of work that UNICEF does to help reverse social discrimination against children with disabilities, to promote participation and solidarity. In Vietnam, some especially innovative work described in this is described in the report. It's about helping local governments, the private sector, and youth organizations to improve the lives of young people marginalized by disability or poverty. The Upshift program combines social innovation training, mentorship, and seed funding to support solutions to problems young people themselves identify. And for example, this work has led to a local coding company in Vietnam employing children with disabilities, or rather adolescents with disabilities, in their work, and also helping and encouraging other private sector organizations to do so. This is the kind of innovation that you will see in UNICEF's work on social policy and inclusion in the future. Let's move over now to some difficult contexts. Social inclusion and policy work is also crucial in emergencies. We are particularly proud of the partnership that we have developed over the last year with the World Bank in Yemen. And I want to make special note that this also includes valuable support from the US government, as well as collaboration on the ground with the European Union, DFID, and others. while Yemen had a social protection system, and there was parts of that system were used, the existing list of beneficiaries was used to quickly scale up and develop a humanitarian cash transfer program outside the government program because of the political situation there and conflict situation, and to reach 1/3 of a population that we know was at risk of famine, where poverty and conflict are really affecting everyone's lives. This other examples of this kind of connecting humanitarian response over the national systems have happened over the strategic plan period in many other countries: Madagascar, Lebanon, Nepal, Philippines, and Jordan, just to name a few. And UNICEF's value added in each of these circumstances is that we are there before the emergency happens, helping support the social protection system, during the emergency and afterwards, helping to make sure that these social protection systems can be both better able to respond and made to link up better with humanitarian cash transfers, which are becoming such a popular and important way of supporting populations affected by emergencies. In 2017, we had some additional chances to do this. For example, in Dominica, where the national social protection system is being used and strengthened to respond to the humanitarian crisis created by the hurricane there. And that work is being done jointly with WFP. In Malawi, as already described, we've helped expand the program during the lean season. So the work in humanitarian context is not only limited to social protection, it also includes work on local governance and peace building. In El Salvador, 3 municipalities with high rates of violence and migration have created safe spaces for children and families to provide for arts and sports activities that enhance their skills in teamwork and in conflict mediation. And finally, on this topic, UNICEF is also focusing on bringing together partners to learn lessons and to improve our work. We led a global conference on social protection in context of fragility and forced displacement, which took place in Brussels this year, which consolidated lessons learned on making use of social protection systems to improve humanitarian and development linkages, and to move beyond pure humanitarian cash responses led by outsiders to systems that governments themselves can own. This work was organized jointly with the EU, FAO, World Food Program, UNHCR, DFID, CETA, and the World Bank. So what are some of the achievements overall in this area? First, I want to point out, you know that during the time of this strategic plan, the focus on the use of humanitarian cash, which was just a small idea by 2014, has become absolutely essential by this year. And UNICEF's investment has risen accordingly with the support of all of you around the table and on the line. So emergency-related cash provided through the Social Inclusion Program rose from 3.2 million in 2014 to 57 million by 2017. 46 countries have incorporated emergency prevention, preparedness, and response in their social protection systems, and 40 countries have made use of their humanitarian action response to strengthen their social protection systems, compared with only 24 countries in 2014. And now I'd like to re-emphasize the point I made at the beginning about value for money. And let's start with Nepal. You can't tell that's Nepal, but we are talking about kids in Nepal with this particular example. So over the last 4 years, Nepal's overall investment of 289,000 social inclusion thematic funds has helped us go from reaching a few kids under 5 with cash transfers to a plan which will ensure that every child in Nepal under 5 receives a cash transfer, their family receives a cash transfer by 2025. So how did this all happen? Well, there was an initial program which the government had set up with an intention of being universal, but started pretty small scale in just a few of the poorest districts. The earthquake kind of changed all that. It showed a need for rapid scale up, just as we were just discussing. And so that scale up took place, and the thematic funds were used to provide further evidence, policy, and design support to scale up further. Nepal now has a costed national child grant expansion strategy, planning to roll out district by district, reaching all children by 2025. And that expansion is fully government funded. To also give you some further concrete numbers, at the beginning of the period, 466,000 children were reached, and by this year, we're up to 924,000 children whose families are regularly receiving these.
This funding was catalytic.
The funding was catalytic, exactly. Thank you, Carla. The funding is not what's providing the cash transfer. That is entirely from the government budget. So a couple of other examples of this value for money, specifically with global thematic funds. There are examples from other sources, but for the sake of our thematic donors, we know we have Spain on the line. We really want you to hear about this. So in Georgia, thematic funds help the government to revise its state-targeted social assistance program to make it more child-sensitive and introduce child benefits within the program. By March 2017, over 150,000 children under 16 were receiving assistance from the state. Only half that amount had been receiving it before the reform. And this work and the continued expansion of that program is due to an investment of only $260,000 of thematic funds. In Myanmar, 400,000 of thematic funds has been invested over 4 years for capacity strengthening of the Ministry of Social Welfare. And this has been focusing on budget preparation and expenditure tracking. Again, sounds boring, sounds intangible. You can picture that little molecule and say, well, what are we really talking about? But what happened concretely? Concretely, that work to build the ministry's capacity on expenditure tracking has resulted in a threefold year-on-year increase in the current budget to enable implementation of key social welfare programs. And finally, in El Salvador, thematic funds have been used to create a national population registry and a unique identity document. This really helps to reinforce the rights of children and families to their legal identity and to welfare services. Without these, they can't access those services. Let's give you a further idea with this slide of how social inclusion funds are actually spent. And this should give you a further understanding of the value for money that's represented. Because as we've noted, quite a lot of money is going directly to social protection work, and in the case of emergency work, to the cash transfers directly. Most of the social protection work is capacity building. In emergency, sometimes the money goes directly to beneficiaries. As you can see, the bulk of expenditure is indeed on social protection because it's the most sectoral area of our work. But this also shows that the very powerful public finance work that I've described, for example, that I've described so far, has been achieved, all of those results have been achieved spending less than $10 million worldwide in 2017. For a few further results from our strategic plan, you can see here how it all adds up. You can see that there's been steady progress made each year with a sample of the targets on social protection, on child poverty, and we added one more because I haven't had time to talk about it so much about climate change. But we have also greatly helped to increase the voice of children in national climate change policies, as you can see in this graph. Further, in 2017, you can see that our work on social inclusion and policy takes place nearly everywhere where UNICEF has a presence, that it reaches millions of children with support that makes a tangible and immediate difference in their lives, and that we have helped to expand children's voice throughout the world, again, in nearly all of the countries where we work. Moving on now to one slide about the future. Here you can see where all the work on social inclusion and policy that has been done over the past 4 years is represented in the new strategic plan. We're not stopping now. The new plan keeps all of this work growing and continuing with even greater recognition of the impact that it has on other areas. So, for example, the public finance for children results is both part of our work on child poverty, but also embedded as a cross-cutting strategy. So that bottom bar on developing and leveraging resources for children, that is used for all goal areas that UNICEF has. Our work on local governance is also included in Goal Area 4, taking on a further emphasis on urban settings as well. And finally, we've given greater visibility to our work on disability, adolescence, and gender in the new strategic plan. So finally, I want to use this final moment to say thank you to all our donors and to all our partners. We could not possibly do any of this without your support, and we want to recognize all of you who have contributed and collaborated to make this work possible. The support that you have given us has allowed us to help all of the children you've met in this presentation, Estede and her siblings, and Shireen too, the happy kids you saw in Yemen and Borneo, and many others through the tangible work that we're doing on child poverty, on social protection, work that multiplies results by getting governments to invest their own funds more effectively via public finance and local governance, and special efforts to reach children with disabilities and expand the real engagement of adolescents. So thank you very much. Looking forward to your feedback and to your questions.